guys, it's Carrie from Lovely Etc. and today I have a really fun furniture flip for you. I am going to be transforming this really dated secretary desk into something very beautiful using a few simple tricks, some paint, and some wallpaper. And I absolutely love how this one turned out. I was given this little secretary desk by a family member several years back, and it has definitely seen better days. There used to be a hutch top, so there's some weird trim still left on the top. And overall, there's just lots of normal wear and tear from decades of use, and it's ready for an update. There's some dated details that I can't wait to change, like these little wood buttons. They're one of those things that just drives me crazy in old furniture. And it also has a weird shiny finish that wasn't necessarily applied the best. There's lots of drips all over, and you can also see it was applied right over the original hardware. So updating that is going to make a big difference as well. I'm excited to give this piece a fresh look and make it beautiful again, because it's not looking great now, but I know in the end it's going to be a beautiful piece of furniture. So first up was a little bit of light demo. I removed all of the old hardware, and then I was thrilled to get rid of these wood buttons. I just popped them out with a flathead screwdriver. Some came out super easy, some took a little bit more work. And I also removed the bottom scalloped piece of trim. I am not trying to make this vintage secretary super modern because I just think the lines of it don't lend themselves to a super modern style. But I do want to update it a bit and just give it a bit of a simpler, fresher take. So I'm going to change up the curves at the bottom just a bit. Instead of this scallop, I'm going to simplify it to one curve on each side, and I just grabbed something circular that was about the right shape, which in my case was a bubble tray for my kids, and traced a circle on each side and then cut them out with my jigsaw. It's hard to tell, but the ends of this piece were also curvy, so I went ahead and straightened them up so that they'd be flush with the rest of the secretary. Normally, you don't necessarily need to sand every piece of furniture that you paint. A lot of times you can skip the sanding altogether. But like I said earlier, this piece had a really shiny, uneven finish, so I had to smooth that down. And also I wanted to just rough it up a little bit so the paint would stick better. So I gave the whole thing just a really quick sand. And then I wiped down all that dust. I used wood filler to fill in the holes from where the wood buttons had been. And with wood filler, just remember you always want to overfill a little bit so that once it's dry, you can just sand it smooth. I also used wood filler to fill in any scratches and gouges on the finish, as well as the old hardware holes, because I knew I was going to be using different hardware. I reattached the bottom trim piece using wood glue and a couple of clamps to hold it in place while the glue dries. And then I got to work sanding all that wood filler smooth and just making sure everything was nice and smooth and ready for paint. Sometimes I know exactly how I want a piece of furniture to look from the very beginning, and sometimes I just kind of play it by ear, and this was definitely a play it by ear time. So I really wasn't sure what paint color or what type of paint I really wanted to use. So I grabbed a few cans of paint that I'd been saving for a future project and tested them out on the secretary to try to choose which one was the best. Now, I don't usually paint test swatches straight onto furniture, and I don't know that I would 100% recommend it because it did take one extra coat of paint to paint over later, but it also helped really clarify what color I wanted to make this piece. The three colors that I tested were Beyond Paint in the color Licorice, which is a straight black, General Finishes Milk Paint in Westminster Green, and Rust-Oleum Milk Paint in Navy. All three of these paints are very different and give a different kind of finish, but none of them require primer. So I put them right on the secretary and made a choice. And in the end, I decided to go with the General Finishes Westminster Green. Now, sadly, this color has been discontinued. General Finishes last year discontinued a lot of their milk paint colors, which I was really sad about because I love their milk paint. But if you're looking for a similar color, Fusion Mineral Paint has a color called Pressed Fern that's very similar and a really beautiful green. And Dixie Belle Chalk Paint also has a color called Palmetto that's pretty similar. Now with my color chosen, it was finally time to get painting. So when I'm painting furniture like this, I like to use a combination of a small foam paint roller and a good paintbrush. And in this case, I am using a zebra palm brush. This is one of my favorites because I found that my hands tend to go numb a little bit if I'm holding a paintbrush too long, and this paintbrush is by far the most comfortable that I found. So when I want to paint something with a really smooth finish without using a sprayer, I found that using these little foam rollers works the best. I've tried a bunch of different brands, and so far I haven't found any difference between any of them. If it's a foam roller, it's pretty much the same thing. But what I have found is that sometimes using a foam roller can leave a little bit of a stippled or orange peel texture, just a tiny little bit. And you can get that out by sanding or just leaving it be because it really is very, very minor. But I've developed my own little method for getting a really smooth finish when I really want to make sure that it is as smooth as possible. So I roll on the paint with the foam roller because that is way, way faster than brushing on paint. And then I very lightly go over where I have just painted with a good paintbrush using really long, even strokes, and it just kind of smooths down any orange peel texture that might have been there. My brush just has the tiniest little bit of paint. You can also spray your brush with just a fine mist of water and then just gently go over where you've just painted. Now, the key to this is you have to do it immediately. If you wait 5 minutes, it's too late. The paint's already started to set up and you're just going to create more brush strokes. But if you do it immediately, I found this works really well. Just work one section at a time and you end up with a really beautiful finish. Now, if you don't want to do all that, that's totally fine. Just roll it on, use your brush to get around all the edges of the drawers and any corners where it's hard to reach. Let it dry. One of my biggest tips anytime you're painting anything is paint it and then walk away. You're going to see lots of imperfections, places where it's drying unevenly, things that you think you need to touch up. Don't do it. Let it dry completely before you try to touch anything up. When you touch half-dry paint with your hand, with a paintbrush, with anything, it just leads to smudges and even more unevenness. Paint's always going to look uneven while it's drying because half is dry and half isn't, and paint colors change as they dry. So leave it alone. Also know that the first coat of paint is usually not going to look that great, but when you come back and do the second or potentially even third coat, it's when it starts to look really even and beautiful. I wasn't sure at first what I was going to do with the inside of the secretary. Maybe paint it a different color, maybe just leave it as stained wood. But in the end, I decided to give it a nice pop with some wallpaper lining. So I went back and painted with my green paint all around the edges, anywhere that paint was going to meet wallpaper. So there would be a little bit of extra margin of paint so that even if the wallpaper was a few millimeters off here or there, it would still look beautiful and no bare wood would be showing through. I also decided to go ahead and paint the little cubbies inside my secretary black with the Beyond Paint black paint that I had because I knew it would be way too difficult to try to wallpaper it, and I thought the black would blend in better than using the same green I used on the outside. Next, I sealed my secretary with Varathane water-based polyurethane. General Finishes milk paint and a lot of all-in-one paints don't technically need to be sealed. You can just skip the primer, do the paint, skip the sealer, and be done. However, I have found that most of the time it's a good idea to seal your furniture, even if you don't have to. If it's a piece of furniture that gets a lot of use, if it's going to have things set on top of it, like a tabletop or a shelf, or if it's just something where you're going to be opening and closing drawers regularly, or people are going to potentially be bumping into it, adding some sealer is just a really good idea. It's going to keep your paint finish looking really beautiful and perfect, and I would rather spend an hour or two extra sealing my furniture now than have my beautiful paint finish ruined prematurely. So I almost always seal my furniture pieces. I have a whole video showing exactly how to seal furniture because I feel like this is one of the trickiest steps of painting furniture. And in that video, I have lots of tips for getting a great finish. But I want to quickly share one of my favorite tips for getting a really perfect finish when you're sealing furniture. And that is you can mix a little bit of the paint that you used into the sealer that you're using. Not a lot. You need maybe 10% paint, 90% sealer. You don't need to measure. This is not a mathematical equation, just a guideline. And doing that just really helps cut down on the streaky finish you can get a lot over painted furniture, and it just makes the sealer really blend in seamlessly and become completely invisible, which is what we want. Invisible, but protective. Once the sealer was completely dry, I drilled holes for my new hardware. I'm using these brass drop pulls that I picked up on Amazon. They are really affordable, and I think they're going to be absolutely beautiful against this green paint. And finally, I'm going to line the inside of my secretary with this beautiful peel and stick wallpaper. This is also from Amazon, and it is crazy cheap, and I'm really happy with how it looks. It looks beautiful in person. So I'll link the hardware and the paper and everything down in the video description. Now, putting this wallpaper in the secretary was not as easy as I would have liked. I removed the hardware for the drop down and took that off just to make it easier to reach the inside portion. And then I cut out different sections of my wallpaper and I traced around to cut it to shape for each of those sections. Installing the wallpaper in the bottom section was easy enough. The sides weren't too bad, but trying to get it in place into the back of the secretary behind those little attached cubbies was definitely a pain. Now, the hard part is peeling off the backing and putting it into place all at the same time. Once you have it in place, if you notice any little parts that are not quite lined up right or are overhanging too much, you can use an X-Acto knife to trim them to be just right. And then finally, I wallpapered the front drop down and then reattached it with the original hardware. And here is my finished piece. I love how this secretary came together, and now I'm super excited to find a spot for it in my house. I love this green color. It's definitely green, but it has a lot of blue undertones, especially when the light hits it, and the gold hardware just looks beautiful against it. And all those little dated details that were driving me crazy, like the scallops at the bottom and the little wood buttons, are gone. Now it's just a clean and simple wardrobe with really nice proportions, and I love that wallpaper inside. It looks beautiful. It works perfectly with this screen. Even though it doesn't match necessarily, it goes, and I think it would look beautiful with almost any shade of green. And it just gives it a really beautiful updated look without trying to be overly modern. I'm pretty thrilled with how this piece came together. And now I think I really want to paint some more things green. I love how this secretary turned out, and I'm so glad that I finally took the time to give it a makeover instead of just passing it along to somebody else. And I think this is just a great example of how a few simple things, some paint, some wallpaper, some new hardware, and a few modifications can completely transform a piece of furniture, even one that doesn't seem like anything special in the beginning. If you haven't, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel, Lovely Etc., where I share lots of inexpensive DIY ideas for creating home that you love. See you next time.